Welcome to the SWIKE podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SWIKE podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. We're here with another mentor, Sherina, who's going to give us a little bit of her background and walk through some topics on education. So she comes to us as a grad who did sociology and philosophy, and then went and did her B.Ed and the Teachers College, and is now teaching at the North York Women's Shelter. So that's kind of my understanding of a bit of your background. But can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing now, and then we'll kind of get into your backstory.
Yeah, so right now I am teaching, I would say this is a private situation at North York Women's Shelter. It's a completely new program that they started because of COVID-19. So to prevent the spread of COVID, they decided that they would create a program where they'll hire a teacher to come in and teach the kids at the shelter, so the kids don't need to go and actually go in person to school. Virtual learning, it is an option, but given the circumstance, for students who might have trouble with focus, who might need that extra support with someone to facilitate the learning, they're like, you know what, we'll just have someone here who is certified in teaching. They can take over the program, teach with the Ontario curriculum, and then they don't need to worry about kids struggling with virtual. They don't need to worry about kids missing out on school. So that's basically what our program is. The difference though is in my classroom, I have more than one grade. So before I had some students in grade 3, I had some in grade 8 and some in kindergarten. Okay. And we're cycling through the day. So in the morning, I'll have a couple of kids for maybe 2 hours, and then I'll have another kid for 1 hour, and then we would try to cycle through. And then because it's a shelter, you have people coming in and out. So I've actually lost 3 of my students. They have since moved, and I have 2 new students now who are in kindergarten.
Sounds good. So it sounds like a bit of a dynamic and flexible environment, doing a whole bunch of different things. So
exactly.
That's amazing. So I'd love to kind of go back in time and start a little bit about what was Sherina like as a kid. So kind of give us more of your background, what were you like growing up, and how did you kind of get to where you are right now?
I'd say I was a very shy kid. I never liked, things like performing or being up in the front, but at the same time, I liked the idea of teaching, which is strange because in teaching, you're up at the front in front of a group of people. But for some reason, like the idea of teaching was just so appealing. Like I can help people get better. I would pretend to do teaching with my cousins. I would give them, I would make my own worksheet and give it to them, and they would actually do it.
And how old was that when you did that?
Like 10, I don't know.
Okay.
I really loved it. We would play teaching, we'd play games. And I think that was sort of like in the back of my mind, like, that's just what I want to do. I never really considered anything else. I had a brief idea of doing law, but realistically, I'm like, no, I can't. That's not something I actually think I want to do. I'm like, teaching has been the main thing. And I come from a family of teachers. My grandma was a teacher, and my aunt is a teacher. And I like being in school, I think. Like just the school environment is really comfortable. So I'm like, yeah, I like to stay here. And then when I was growing up, I realized in high school, we had a co-op program. And it was kind of, you had to find your own co-op. Now for high school, it's different because in university, you're getting paid. It's an actual job. In high school, it's more volunteer. Your paying is your credit. You're getting 2 credits. So in the morning, we would have the class. They would sit us down. They'd say, okay, you had to find your own co-op. We're not finding it for you. You got to find someone who's willing to take you on. And I said I wanted to do a teaching co-op. So I went around to different schools. He said, are you willing to take a co-op student? I can just be an assistant to you. And I had a school nearby, 5-minute walk. They were like, yeah, that's cool. We'll take you in. So I was like, that's great. I got so lucky because it's a school that was close by. They were open to the idea. And so what happened was the principal gets in contact with the school. They settle out the details of what I'll be doing. And I was assigned to my first, I would say she's a mentor teacher, Miss Mena, and it was with a special needs classroom.
Okay.
It was different. So I was working again in a small group with kids and really learning how you can get kids interested in learning, how you can make kids comfortable in the classroom. I think that was the biggest thing I learned in the special needs classroom. It was less so lesson planning. It was more so, how can I make this child feel like they want to be in school, right? Having a hard time, how can you bring them back to wanting to participate and sort of go away from that closed area? And then I was in a second classroom, which was a bigger, more normal, 20 kids, 1 teacher, and that was a split, grade 1, 2. which is completely different because now I'm no longer worried about, how they feel. Now it's like, well, how do I lesson plan? How do you facilitate all this? I didn't actually get to see that because I was doing co-op. So I was really more of an assistant. I would go and take photocopies. I think that was a big help because, I was there for maybe an hour. The whole hour would be just photocopying, right? So I'd imagine if you're a teacher, if I wasn't there, that 1 hour of her, prep and lunch would be doing that. So I'm like, where do you get a break? Where do you get to kind of like sit back and it never occurred to me then until I was in the classroom myself. I'm like, wow, they don't get time to sort of like sit down. And then after doing my co-op, I went and applied I was thinking the programs that I wanted to do. I'm not a strong math person. I've never really been into science. I've loved literature. And again, in grade 11, I took a class which was sociology, psychology, and anthropology.
Okay.
And from the three, I liked sociology. I liked all three. But when I was applying in university, I'm like, I think I'll focus on sociology the most. That's really what sparked the sociology. That was from a grade 11 class, just one class. And then same thing for philosophy. When I was in grade 12, I took a philosophy course. I loved it. I loved every single bit of it. I think everyone else thought it was really boring, but I'm like, no, I like talking about ethics. I like talking about morals. I like discussing, logic and puzzles. So when I applied for university, they're like, okay, it was a co-op program. And they were like, if you're doing co-op, you also have to have 2 majors. So I'm like, okay, sociology, philosophy, done. Like, that's what I'm going for. And I was like, if I want to be a teacher, if I'm going to be doing the younger grades, I don't need to worry about doing a math course or history course. I can do these 2 and then teach elementary. That was kind of like the games, the long range plans, and just crossing my fingers that that's what'll happen. And of course, along the way, I got different comments. So my family was really supportive. They're like, you want to do teaching, go for it. And then you also got comments that are like, well, there's not a lot of jobs available. What's your backup plan? And I was like, I don't really have a backup plan. Just hoping that maybe after I graduate, something will pan out. But yeah, I really just stuck to it. The only difficulty I ran into was when I was doing my university co-op, because when you're doing a philosophy, because it was under philosophy. Now, I don't know what a philosophy co-op is, right?
Sure.
Business co-op, there's science co-op, and then there's philosophy co-op. Like, what is a philosophy co-op?
You sit with Socrates or something all day and just kind of think of it. Yeah.
And so I was like, I don't understand why this exists, but I'm going to do it. And it had nothing to do with philosophy. My first job, I was working in a company that does circuit boards, and I was kind of like an assistant for the customer service group, which was really sort of filing. I was doing a lot of inputting data with lots of numbers. I was basically all over the place because they were like, we're taking you in and you're kind of just gonna be floating around departments helping. That was the first co-op. And then the second one I actually did in UTSC, in the admin building. And again, same thing, I was looking at data, I was inputting stuff, nothing with philosophy, even though it came under philosophy co-op. And those were actually the first 2 jobs that I had that were like legitimate jobs, and that was not just volunteering. So I was really thankful for that. I think if people can get into a co-op program, it's really, really helpful, because that's literally like what I had on my resume was all from my co-op. I'm like, these things I learned, these things that I did. And surprisingly, my grade, it's just high school co-op, but that was the main thing that got me into my program when I applied for Teachers College. I was able to reach out to my mentor teacher that I had at the time. So this is 2018 is when 2017 is when I'm applying now, looking to put my application. And I'm looking for this mentor teacher that I had in 2011. And I was jumping through hoops. I'm like, I need to find her. I managed to find her, and she was really sweet. She's like, yeah, I remember you'll write your letter. But I'm like, just remembering to have those connections.
Right.
People that help you, right? Because this is someone who I met 7 years ago, right? I haven't even spoken to since then. But because I remembered her name and stuff, and because, we connected at the time, I'm like, that was so helpful. If I didn't have her, I'm not too sure who I would have used to talk about my experience. Because when you're applying for Teachers College, you need to write a letter stating why you would make a good teacher. What is your experience? What makes you think you belong in this program? And for me, the biggest thing was talking about the experience I had with those special needs kids, and how me being there fueled my interest in being a teacher. Because a lot of the experiences I had just in grade 11, right? I was only there for about 2 hours a day, but that alone for me was like, what am I doing that's making these kids happy, right? When teachers are coming and telling me like, what did you do? Why is he happy now? Why, like, what magic did you sprinkle? I'm like, I want to spread that magic for everyone, right? I want to open that up to more places. And then you go to the actual teaching field and you realize that it's so hard to really do that. When I got into York and I started doing my placements, I'm like, there's so much I need to do. And I feel bad because there's some kids that are falling behind. I'm like, how can I, juggle, looking at the way the system is, how do you juggle these few students who might be falling behind? You have some students who are advanced and you have 1 hour to do this lesson. Some kids need one-on-one help. Some need more, some need that. And it's just, where I am right now is really trying to figure out what is the best way to approach all these different types of learners, right? Is it even feasible for one person to, actually help all these kids be at the level that they need to be?
Right.
And like we spoke a little about earlier, if you could rewrite the whole system, like how many things I would want to be different, right? Like it's funny because it's really a shock going from just being a student watching the teacher teach, and then when you're in the driver's seat now and it's like, no, now you have your classroom, now you're in charge. Very different.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. So it sounds like that relatively early on, you knew what you wanted to do, and it was almost like a straight shot there, where things started to fall into place. In that, where I mean, doing worksheets or fake worksheets as a 10-year-old kind of points to that. But were there? So you mentioned a little bit about entertaining law, but it didn't really quite go through there. What was kind of the thought process behind that, or what kind of pushed you there, or what were the influences? Were there mom and dad? Were they teachers as well? You said your grandmother was a teacher.
Yes.
But what did they do? Brothers and sisters? Did they kind of go down the teaching route as well, or?
So my mom's younger sister is a teacher, wonderful teacher. I think my grandma, all of her sisters were all teachers back in Sri Lanka and stuff, and even here for a while. But no one, I think this is my great grandfather. One of them was a lawyer as well. We have a couple of lawyers in the family.
Okay.
I think the reason I considered law was just because in my head, I like to argue with myself a lot in my head. And I'm like, okay. Like again, with the philosophy thing, right? With logic and you're kind of putting things together. That was kind of why I entertained the idea of law. And I thought, okay, I mean, you would go to school, it's a similar process, and you'd write your LSAT, this is what, do I want to do this? And when I brought it up, I mean, I think the reason I thought about it for a while was because a couple of times when I bring up the teaching, you'd kind of get like a side eye sometimes of like, is this feasible?
Sure.
Not from my parents. My parents have never said anything about my career choices. They have been supportive no matter what. But just from other people who kind of, the teaching is not so great, look at other people who are not getting jobs. Some people have been in this career for 10 years, they're still not permanent. And I was kind of like, I hear you, but I'm gonna do it anyway.
Sure.
Because law, I don't see it as something that I can realistically do. When I put myself in that position of like, can you actually go to court and like fight a case? Like, I don't think I'm gonna do that. That's gonna happen. Of course, there's other things you can do in law too, but I just figured the whole LSAT and the studying and the stress is not something that I would personally, it would not be satisfying for me to go through. Like maybe I could have considered it, but when I started doing practice LSATs online, I was like, no, I don't like this at all. And I liked the teaching environment since I was younger. I loved it in grade 11. I've done tutoring in between. I loved it then. I'm just gonna stick with what I like doing.
That's awesome. So going to your story, it kind of seems like that high school co-op was really kind of that thing that really propelled you forward, right? In the sense that you got a good feel of the classroom, and even that special needs classroom where you had kind of more personal attention to a particular kid, and then got a bit of a taste of the challengers that teachers go through, because it seems really nice on the outside. It's like, well, why don't you just teach him this? But because there's such a spectrum of whatever 18, 20 kids that each need individual attention, you just can't really do that. But so it sounds like the recommendation is to do a high school co-op or something to as early as you can get a feel for what you're trying to do or what you plan to do, right? So talk to me a little bit about the interest in kind of sociology, philosophy, and how that kind of impacts your interest in the teaching realm.
I would say philosophy for me is kind of like just the way my mind works,
Okay.
your ethics, stuff like that. I would say more sociology. So a couple of my classes that I had really focused on minority groups, how are people treated, hierarchy, stuff like that. And it really gives you an insight into how unfortunate certain people's lives are just because of their backgrounds, races, religions, whatever. And when you take that with you into the classroom, you will see the system even more, right? Who are the kids who are getting called out on the most?
Right.
Who are the ones who are falling behind? Is it because they genuinely are not understanding the material? Is it because the teacher is unconsciously using their bias to, pick on certain groups? You might not even notice it, right? Until you consciously sit down and go, why did I pick on this kid? Right? Why is it the same group of kids are always in those extra help groups? Why is it the same group of kids who are always in those extra, like it really opens your eyes to those things. I had one particular professor, Paloma Villegas. She was amazing at opening people's eyes to the biases that exist in society, in hierarchy, especially, and even with like gender studies, right? Like men, women, the differences, how are girls treated in the classroom, how are boys treated in the classroom, why do teachers say I need a strong boy to carry this? Like just say you want a student to carry this, really? All those kind of things is what kind of feel me like, okay, how can I take this, go to the classroom and change the minds of kids so that we can become better? Because kids are in school for a really long time. Everything they learn is, you're shaping how they're going to be as adults, and every single grade matters. They're always, changing their minds, developing. So it's important they learn these things as young as possible so that they don't need to grow up and be like, oh, I need to change these biases. Like, don't have the biases in the first place. And they'll be better as they're growing up and they'll see things differently. Hopefully they'll be, stronger, more independent, more confident, as opposed to, silencing and keeping them onto a certain stereotype, I would say.
Yeah, there's some conversations that I've had where, like, is that the job of the teachers or is that the job of the parents, right? Because technically, I mean, like, you're learning math, science, reading, writing, arithmetic, is what you're supposed to be learning in school. Like, biases and unconscious biases, is that a subject you should take in kindergarten or like grade 4?
One of those things where it's not like you wouldn't address it like, guess what? Today we're going to talk about your biases.
Of course, yeah.
The way a lot of teachers, especially in teachers college, they touch on this. They say, I mean, the way you're approaching it is through your lessons.
Sure.
Right. So when you're talking about, you might be talking about something with food, and people might commonly approach a certain type of food, which everyone knows, but you're allowed to draw on other things too. You can bring on other ethnicities, other foods. When we're reading stories, when you're using names, just making it normal so that we're not always using a certain, we're not just using Anglo-Saxon, like that kind of thing, where you want to make sure that kids all feel equal. Kids are not. I think a good example we did in Teachers College with a professor, we were talking about holidays.
Okay.
And the holiday season, and who gets to celebrate their holiday without missing school, who maybe have to miss school to celebrate their holiday, right? And we know that we have in school, there's 2 weeks off for Christmas. So anyone who celebrates Christmas, they're not missing it on school. But say you celebrate something else that comes in the middle of the week. You will now miss school in order to celebrate your holiday. And it's kind of opening up those discussions with kids. And, could be part of social studies, right? In grade 2, you learn about the world, you learn about different cultures. You can open up that conversation about, so when do we celebrate our stuff? How could we make this fair? How could we reorganize the calendar so that everyone gets a fair chance to celebrate their holiday? Could we take summer, instead of having 2 months, could we take away a month and divide that into the year so that other kids can also celebrate their stuff and not have to miss school? And it's that kind of thing where you're not telling kids, well, oh, I think you need to think differently. It's kind of like, what do you think about this? And get their mind to work critically so that they can recognize it on their own, right? You don't want to plant the ideas for them, but you want to give them the tools so that they start to think for themselves and start to wonder, what if we did things this way? What if we did things that way?
Yeah, I think that's amazing, and that's why you and I connect in terms of like, well, really giving them the skills critically and all that sort of stuff. More on the soft skills versus the hard skills is definitely one thing to kind of consider. So walk us through a little bit about the choice of schools, right? So you have kind of a chance to go into, I guess, like different schools. So did you specifically choose one because of co-op? Did that kind of carry through you? And then how did you ultimately choose the teachers college for you? How did you go through those two decisions?
So when I was so I started my co-op, well, the high school one was because it was close by, and I was looking at different places. I'm like, just calling up and being like, is this something you're into? And then when I was applying for university, I was thinking co-op will be helpful because I will finally step into the work field, right? Hopefully somewhere where it has to do with, an actual job and not just doing something part-time, where I would learn actual skills. And because it was University Scarborough close by, I'm like, wonderful, it's co-op, it's close by, I'll go there, because I also applied to other places. And then when I was coming closer to the end of my undergrad, I'm like, okay, now do I really want to do Teachers College seriously? Because you're paying for your applications too. It's not cheap, right? You're paying for every single place you want to apply to. And so I considered Trent, but Trent is a bit further away. I considered York and one other one, it's not coming to mind. I can't remember. I think it was UOIT maybe. And when I heard back from Trent and York, I'm like, okay, York is close by. They have a well-recognized program. I will go there.
Not OIZ, the downtown Toronto, or?
I didn't. Oh, okay. So the reason I didn't apply to OIZ is because I was not getting my reference letters on time.
Okay. So it's a timing issue.
Yes. So I considered OIZ first, and then what happened is because I needed it by a certain date, and I hadn't contacted, I didn't hear back from anyone yet. I couldn't apply for that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That was more of a technicality than anything. And then between the three schools, so a lot of it was more on the proximity. It seems like that kind of went out of everything.
And interestingly enough, so my aunt is a teacher, also went to UTSC, also went to York.
Okay.
Yeah, not that, it had nothing to do with my choices, but I was like, yeah, everyone talks about York a lot and I've heard good things. So I'm like, there's nothing it's not just because it's close by. It's also well known. It has a good program. So I'm not losing anything by choosing one that's closer.
Yeah, fair. So walk us through a little bit about your Teachers College experience, and maybe we'll do a deep dive later on. But what was that part? And then more on you graduated and all the folks that said, hey, it's going to be hard to get a job and whatever. What was that experience like?
Completely changed, right? Yeah, it's really, so got in. I didn't really even tell people I was applying because for me, it's one of the things that until I know what's going to happen, I don't like the stress of people asking so did you get in? Did you get in? So I kind of kept it to myself. And when I knew I was going, even then, until I was kidding confirm, I didn't want to say anything because I'm like, what if I choose something else? I don't know. Yeah, got in. And then the first week I was stressed, had no idea what was going on. I had to take the TTC. Thankfully, they opened the TTC to get to York. So, wake up early morning, you have your 8:30 classes. And you also have placements once a week. It was two different placements actually. One is in the community where you volunteer close to the place where you're living. And then you also have one where you go to a classroom. Both are very beneficial. The special thing that York does with a community placement is it gives you a chance to really do sort of a deep dive about who you're living amongst. I was volunteering with high school kids and tutoring them. I would have never done this if it wasn't for York. And the place is 5 minutes from my house with kids who all live in my neighborhood, right? People I would have never interacted with had I not gone to York and gotten this volunteer placement. And I continued volunteering there even after the program finished because I really liked being there. So that was one thing that was really great that I took from the program, is that they have this place where you're not just doing school placement, you're also learning about the community that you live in. And the courses they're helpful, but I also feel like we really do need to put more emphasis on being inside the classroom. Right. So even though it's helpful to be there once a week, I feel like in comparison to the time I spent in the lecture hall, would have been more beneficial for me to be in the classroom. Because you only learn so much talking, right? And talking is very easy, right? When we had our lectures, we'll talk about, how can we increase inclusivity? How can we make kids feel good? What were some things that you took from your own learning that you want to change in a classroom? It's it's fantastic to have a discussion. But when I'm in the classroom now, all those things we talked about are it's so much harder to put into action. And there's so many things that I need to do here that I don't know how to do because I haven't been in the classroom enough yet to gain those skills.
Right.
Being in the classroom once a week is very different from when you're the one controlling the classroom for that whole week.
Definitely, yeah. My wife's a teacher, and there's definitely a difference between kind of the intellectual knowledge, the concept, versus the experiential and actually being in the thick of it, right? So it's
exactly.
I like to tell people it's a difference between reading every single book on driving versus
Yeah.
actually being behind the wheel of a
Exactly.
car,
Yeah.
right? Totally
Yeah.
different things
Yeah,
where
you can memorize the book, but it's not going to help until you've like driven how many ever times to, actually understand what it takes.
exactly. So how much was the teachers college or that part of the education impacted by COVID?
So I would say, I mean, the things that I took from teachers college is really more so, checking my biases, that kind of stuff, which I still need. Whether I'm doing it virtually, whether I'm doing it in the classroom, like those things are all still good. I learned a lot of stuff. I just think I wish I had more time learning in the classroom. I think with COVID, the thing is I finished the program before COVID started.
Okay.
So I was able to finish without, having to worry about doing virtual learning and all that stuff. That kind of ended and COVID just started. So all the skills that I took from Europe, all the things I learned from my programs are still, they're applicable. They're still okay. I didn't, waste time doing anything and like feel like, oh, I don't need to use it now. No, I still need to use everything. And I think, no, it's still all good. It's still, I didn't lose anything from COVID, I would say. If anything, there was like a demand for teachers' jobs, and it's like everyone who said, you're not gonna get a job, it's like, nope, now everyone is looking for teachers. So worked out, things worked out in odd ways, I would say.
Sounds good. So walk us through kind of how you ended up at the North York Women's Shelter, because that's a little bit different than the traditional going with the boards and yeah, they're scrambling for teachers left, right, and center.
Yeah.
but how did you end up with that role?
Yeah, okay. So one of my close friends from UTSC, she works here. And so the manager had put out, she's like, listen, if you know anyone who's recently graduated, we're looking for a teacher. They have been actively interviewing. So my friend is like, well, yeah, my friend just graduated, so I'll let you know. And so I sent my resume to them. We had an interview. They told me they would get back to me, and then they got back to me and they're like, would you consider this? And so when they were interviewing for the job, they were saying, you're gonna have different grades. The biggest thing about working here was less so the education. It was really more so the self-regulation, the emotional regulation, because it's a shelter. You have kids who are from trauma. You have kids who have seen, terrible things, who are still learning to manage their emotions. So yes, we want them to learn the curriculum. We also want them to feel safe. We also want to make sure that how to make a classroom where the kids feel, good coming here. They don't feel scared. They want to be here. So that was the main thing. So when they hired me, that was a big part of the interview process. And that's still things I took from York still worked here, because part of some of the courses I took was like, how do you make sure you're being conscious of kids who might be coming from trauma, right? You can't go to a kid and, ask them like, so what's going on at home? Or like, oh, you had to like infer these things and make sure you're not targeting when you're speaking, but making sure that they know that they can feel safe, they can come to if they need to. You're not ever directly asking them, because that can cause, it can re-traumatize them by bringing up memories. But yeah, a lot of it is just being careful with what you're saying, and then also making sure you're facilitating, those, how do we calm down? How do we speak? How can we use our words? Not our actions all the time. It's a lot of that.
Right. So it sounds like it's chalk another one up to networking and staying connected with people in order to land the job, and then
exactly
kind of sits with you in terms of, well, it's all about connecting with your students and making sure that they feel safe, they feel comfortable in that. So yeah, it's really keeping yourself in check so that you can help others in that same vein as well. So if you were to be able to go back to young Sherina in either high school or university or whenever you wanted to, like, what sort of SWIKE, the stuff I wish I knew earlier, would you give her?
If you can get more volunteer experience in the fields that you're interested in, right? Okay. So I know in high school they have 40 hours or whatever, that kind of thing that you need to do. But if you can really I think a lot of people do the 40 hours and then it's finished. But I think if you're able to think of all the things you're interested in and find volunteering experience in each of those fields, that will be so beneficial, not just for me, but for so many people, right? If you could get a taste of that place you want to be. And I think there's also a lot of pressure that you need to know what you're going to do ahead of time. So, researching the things you want to do, what does it take? And I think really sit down with those people and ask them, like, what is it like for you in your seat? Talk to those professionals that you think those like don't limit yourself to just places you're interested in. Like even if you think you're not interested in a certain field, ask, find out. And I think it's important to emphasize like what's it like starting compared to what it's like after you've been in the place for how many every years, right? Because I think, I think for teachers it can take up to 5 years for you to finally feel comfortable in that role. And I think it's important for people to know like this is what it's going to take in those 5 years. These are the things that you're going to feel. These are the struggles you will face, for to hear like it's going to be really difficult for you to manage your classroom. Like these are the skills that you need first before you think about, how can I make my classroom look cute? How can I do this? How can I make that one special kid feel good? Like these are the things that are going to hit you first. And then, sorry, the other things will come later.
Right, that sounds like some good guidance, because a lot of times we see kind of the polished kind of facade of folks where, I've been teaching for 10 years and it looks easy because they got the hang of it. But like the first year, the first class that they ran, running around and yelling, screaming, whatever, and it probably wasn't as easy as they made it out to be. So asking kind of the good with the bad, and I think you hit the nail on the head where experience and really exploring, I think is two important parts where you make a decision when you're like 17 on what you're supposed to be doing for your career. So why not explore a few things and kind of really knowing what you are getting yourself into. So taking that more than the 40 hours and as many hours as you need would definitely be helpful for many folks. So what other SWIKE or words of wisdom would you have for yourself, or are there any things that come to mind that you'd kind of share with yourself in younger years?
I would still stick to, if there's something you're passionate about, stick with it, right? I mean, I would say I'm fairly impressionable. Like if someone tells me something's not good, I can think sometimes it sticks in my mind a little bit, but I'm also fairly stubborn. So, if I kept listening to people saying not to go into teaching, I don't think I would be here today, right? I would have done something else. And who knows, like that could have been great too, but with where I am now, I'm happy. So I'm happy that I continued to sort of follow through and stick with my vision, because I had a plan like this, and that's what I did. I'm very lucky that that's how it worked out for me. It doesn't work like that for everyone. But if you do have a passion for something, like, don't continue to follow it as best as you can. And if other things happen along the way, it's fine. Like, go with it, but don't, you don't need to always, things can change completely, right? Like a couple of years ago, yes, teaching was impossible to get into and things flip on its head. So you never know, right? And that was a span of 10 years of like people saying no, 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 no. So give yourself room to have failure and to question and I feel like another thing that I would even tell myself today is it's okay if you've done all those things and you feel like you want to do something different, like that is okay too. You should give yourself the freedom to explore other careers. You should not feel like you were tethered to the thing that you studied. Like there's so many things available out there that you don't even know. Certainly positions that exist that, doesn't have to be lawyer, teacher, doctor, engineer. There's so many things within that. Like don't limit yourself.
Right. I think that's important, where it used to be that what you graduated with was what you did for the rest of your life. But there's so many people who you see them where they are and you ask them, you graduated with a what? Like, how did that happen? There's so many more people who have some totally different careers than what they did in high school or university or whatever their career path. And people can change, and it's starting to become more and more of a norm that you're almost expected to change and do something different.
Yeah.
So, what other future aspirations you have? So now that you're kind of getting settled into the teaching, what's kind of beyond, or have you started thinking about that stage yet?
I'm not sure yet. So I like teaching. I'm still curious. I'm still debating on, do I want to apply to boards? Like, is that something I'm going to do? I'm going to stick to sort of applying to private schools. And, because right now I'm working on a contract. So, like say you continue work on contract and your contract finishes, like, am I going to continue staying in the classroom, or will I go move on to something like tutoring? Will I move on to working with kids, but not in the classroom? Because I'm open to those things as well. And I think the things that I like to do is not just in the classroom. I do want to go into guidance. I would love to go into guidance counseling. So I would need to take courses for that. And also be a librarian. So those are two things in the school, right? Still in school, not in the classroom, but working with the kids either way. those are open. So looking to do AQ courses for library and guidance. Those are two things I'm looking forward to. And then I'm currently doing a side business of baking. So that's going slowly because I don't want to push it too much because I'm struggling over here, but that's going to. I'm going to consider my baking and cake and stuff like that.
Cool.
Yeah.
A bunch of topics that we'll probably get into in future episodes if you're willing to come back on. But so thanks so much for sharing your story and your journey and some of your SWIKE. And then, is there anything that you want to part with in terms of advice or anything for folks that are listening?
I would say definitely take opportunities like this, when you're getting the podcast and someone talking to you, invest in those, watch those, take your time, because it can be really helpful to hear words from someone who's starting and knowing their journey. Because sometimes you listen to a story, you realize it matches with yours. That can be really helpful. So definitely listen to other people's experiences, and then if it works, great. If it doesn't work, you can just toss it out. You don't need to listen to it if it doesn't work for you. It's okay.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. So I'm a huge advocate of mentorship. So learning from others, I think, is definitely one way that folks could learn and to explore a little bit more widely. And then hopefully that'll point you into more of the right direction, right? So take from the conversation what you enjoyed and loved and were interested in, and then follow that. And the parts that you didn't like so much, well, maybe you kind of leave that to the side as a different topic.
Yeah, and I would say another thing too is, looking for mentors that are where you are at currently. Right. So for example, if you're just starting out and your mentor has been, in the thing 30 years, right? Like they have all the long range skills that they're already okay with. And you might be still struggling with this little thing. Like you might want to find someone who's closer to you to guide you through that small little thing. And then you can go on to next, like bigger things, like just being gentle with yourself and knowing, it's okay to struggle and to get help with those small things first before you go into the bigger things and stuff like that.
Cool. I think that's a lot of useful information for folks, and thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you back, and hopefully we can discuss a little bit more on education, maybe on baking and other philosophizing or something like that as well. Thanks a lot for joining us, Sherina.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Take care. Thanks.
All right, take care.
Thanks for joining us on the SWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Luki Danu, LUKIDANU, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.